right. Well, thanks everyone for listening to my spiel coming up. I think Sam did a great job of kind of encapsulating what our agency does, sort of the role that we fill, and definitely acknowledging that we're new. Again, we've only started since 2022, and our mission was a lot different 2 years ago. Okay, I want to make sure that doesn't echo. Sorry, that was on my end. But yeah, we had a lot of different goals 2 years ago than we do now. So it's been a really great change on the ecological side that I have really enjoyed being able to take charge of and make Utah Lake a little bit more of an ecologically recognized place. There's a lot of people and partners who work on Utah Lake that are amazing and make this work possible. For one, Keith Hambrecht's listed on here. This was our presentation that we put together for our Utah Lake Symposium this year, and he unfortunately was not able to attend, but he helped me make the presentation. He's one of our predominant partners with Forestry, Fire, and State Lands, who makes a lot of our treatment possible, but we have a lot of other great partners that I'll talk about as we go forward. But Utah Lake is predominantly on sovereign lands, so they have a lot of say in what goes on, and they're really helpful in getting our projects out on the lake. So just to start, I guess my presentation is usually just a little bit more about Utah Lake, then, now, and what we kind of look forward to in the future. So previously, Utah Lake has been something that has been, again, as Sam said, under a bad kind of reputation in a way, where a lot of people have this image of 50, 60 years ago that might not necessarily represent it in what it is now. And generations over time have changed what they view as Utah Lake. So what people are seeing now, they think is normal. What people saw 50 years ago, they thought was normal. But there really hasn't been a normal for Utah Lake in a really long time. So we have been really working to change that perception. So as you guys have probably heard about invasive Phragmites, that is one of our biggest things that we deal with on Utah Lake, Jordan River, and Great Salt Lake, along with tamarisk and Russian olive. So these are invasive species we deal with predominantly. And this is kind of where Utah Lake's, at least ecological restoration, is kind of started, at least. So over 10 years ago, we started with about 10,000 acres of Phragmites on Utah Lake, which is a pretty good portion, considering Utah Lake, I think, is 96,000 square acres, I think I want to say. Sam can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's big, and that's a really large portion of it covered in invasive weed. And you guys have probably heard some of the negative effects that Phragmites has, not only on wildlife habitat, water quality, but also human recreation. It makes it impossible to get out anywhere if you're trying to get on the water. And it's impossible to see through, and just generally a really bad kind of take to have on a recreational source in Utah. So that's with Great Salt Lake and Jordan River too. It's definitely a roadblock for a lot of different things. So over 10 years ago, we started our water restoration initiative applications in partnership with Utah County and Forestry, Fire, State Lands as the Utah Lake Commission. And it started this huge collaborative effort to start treating Phragmites in about 2014. So many partners have been involved in this. So that's, again, Forestry, Fire, State Lands, Utah County. Those are the people who are on the ground actually making it happen with the equipment they need. And they're the ones doing the long hours in the rough seasons so that we can have a better Utah Lake. So again, Utah Lake Commission, we started it, and now Utah Lake Authority, we kind of continue to manage it. USU has been a great research partner in order to let us know what best management practices are for treating Phragmites at this large of a scale, and especially in such a fluctuating system. WRI, the Water Restoration Initiative, through the state, has been phenomenal in giving us this funding and this opportunity to be able to treat on such a large scale continually over the last 10 years. This is something that's not easy and requires a lot of dedication to. And I think WR makes these kind of projects possible. And a lot of people use them for so many different things around the state. And it's definitely an amazing program that I think should be elsewhere in the US, but it's not. And then the other one is the Invasive Species Mitigation Fund, and that is through the USDA and UDAF, and they are great partners as well and have provided funding for this in the past. And again, WRI just made all of this possible. This wouldn't have been able to even get off the ground without that initial funding. So this is just a picture again, just showing probably about 10 years ago what this Phragmites invaded landscape could look like. It's pretty saturated. Utah Lake only has an average depth of about 9 feet when full. So it's really big, but really shallow. So it's this perfect environment for Phragmites to grow in. And it creates these huge monocultures that just take absolutely everything over. So you can see it's a big problem to try to take on and kind of a scary pool to jump into. So how we kind of dealt with Phragmites, it's really similar to Great Salt Lake. They were kind of the research foundation for this, but treatment is so important. Being consistent in this work is instrumental. You have to continue to have a long-term management plan and be active with it in order for to see results. And again, it's taken over a decade of work to see these results. If we were to only do this for a year or two, or maybe skip a few years, it just wouldn't nearly be as profound of a success. And all these are research-backed best practices. These are again through USU. A lot of the research is done on Great Salt Lake, and a lot of it is applied on Utah Lake, which is really nice. We do acknowledge that there are herbicide trade-offs with Phragmites treatment. You do use glyphosate, and this is, a general vegetation killer. It's going to kill anything it touches that's vegetation. So we do know that there are some areas that have been damaged because of this, and that's something we're trying to make better now as we come to a more dwindled area that is covered by Phragmites, getting more to a hand treatment or a spot spraying type of regime. But without this initial big heave of herbicide, we wouldn't have been able to get to where we are now. So there are some trade-offs that come with it. And Phragmites isn't a really aggressive weed, so you have to be really aggressive in treatment. So equipment challenges have also been something that we've dealt with. Again, across Great Salt Lake, Jordan River, and Utah Lake, they're all kind of unique in how they act. So Utah Lake, again, is really shallow, really mucky, and has a lot of water fluctuation. So marsh masters, so some in the pictures on the top, in the top right, or at the top and the bottom right, are marsh masters, and they're like basically these aquatic tanks, but a fraction as heavy, so they could float almost. And these are so needed to get this work done. They do all the mowing and the trampling that we need, and no other machinery could do what we need to do. And then again, helicopters are what we are using right now for aerial spraying. It usually is in about 60-foot swaths, which is pretty large, but we're getting to this point now where acreage is getting so scattered and low that we want to get into a more targeted approach. And what's really important about all of this work that we've been doing over the past decade is monitoring this change. Initially, the Department of Ag and Food had some monitoring transects throughout Utah Lake that we're basically just saying, is this treatment even working? Is it specific to Utah Lake? What is coming back? And we've been able to take those over now under a different contractor, and we're really excited to see what they have to say about it as we continue into more of this new stage of revegetation rather than just treatment of Phragmites. So, and again, those study results are basically like, yeah, this works. It's working really well. So that is good to know. But we want to keep continuing to monitor this change as we go and we add more elements into our management. And again, just consistency is so key with this. Being able to do this every fall and continue to treat throughout the year in different ways is the only way to get this done on Utah Lake, at least. So now we're getting to this point where you can see in the bottom right picture that we have treated a lot of Utah Lake. A lot of Phragmites has been treated for at least 3 consecutive years. It's been mowed and it's starting to break down, but we're just left with this emptiness. What do we do with what's left, essentially? So that's kind of the next phase that we've been starting to shift into within the last 2 years. So now we are really trying to shift towards a revegetation focus and fixing those areas that may have been damaged and trying to mitigate some of the issues that Phragmites pose on Utah Lake's shoreline. So what we've learned so far is overall on Utah Lake that 75 or is actually about 80% of reduction in Phragmites cover on Utah Lake as of this year, which is really exciting. Initially, I said we had about 10,000 acres as of 2012. This year, I think we only treated 1,500 acres, which is a huge decrease. And that's something that we're really happy about, to be able to see that decline in the last decade. That's a really great speed for that. And so, but some of the things that we've learned so far about our efforts is that restoration takes time. This is not something that we can count on to happen by itself. Even though we've removed Phragmites, that doesn't necessarily mean the seed bank is intact, or that these native plants are just going to come back by themselves after so many years of not being on Utah Lake, or being able to have the chance to grow in competition with Phragmites. And we know that this is going to take effort, and it's going to take time. We're not going to be able to see the results of it immediately in a summer, or maybe even a year or two. It's going to, just like treating Phragmites, it's going to take continual amounts of effort over an elongated period of time. One of the easiest things for many restoration managers to use is seed. But for us on Utah Lake, seeding is quite complicated, sadly. A lot of the species that we are looking to establish do not reseed very well without some type of scarification. Like our bulrushes, they just don't take to seed very well in many cases, unless they're stratified. So that makes that difficult to source. And then also, Utah Lake's water levels fluctuate like crazy every year, not only with spring pulses, but since it is managed technically as a reservoir, water can be allocated to go downstream or be saved up in reservoirs at any time. So, depending on what kind of water year we have, it can vary so drastically. So, like per se this year or the last few years, we have a pretty consistent water levels that have only fluctuated with spring pulses. But years previous, we've had been almost 4 or 5 feet below compromise. This year we were over a foot above compromise for 6 months. So it changes pretty aggressively. So it makes seeding a challenge for us, but it's something that we're continuing to research through USU and some grants that they've procured. So it's something that we want to take into the future with us, because it is more cost effective and can be spread over such a large scale. And then with revegetation in general, it can be both passive and active. And in our case, we need a combination of both. In some areas, we have seen some recovery in the absence of Phragmites, and others we haven't. So that's where we have to take a little bit more of a step in. So adaptation is key with all this. Utah Lake changes a lot, along with a lot of our water bodies that we have here. So being able to be flexible and have resources to make these things happen is really important. And then collaborating with everybody to stay in the loop with best management practices, what's working where, is super important to be able to make sure you're successful, at least in the short term. So some of the things that we've been doing revegetation wise, really started this year. Essentially, the planning had to start in 2023, but a lot of the action that we took was this year and this summer. And this included both research, application, and active management. So the USU again is doing a seed bank analysis through an EPA grant, which is very exciting, because we want to be able to take this revegetation effort onto a really large scale. And we are trying to put a heavy emphasis on pollinator species. So if you've ever heard of it's the pollinator habitat program through the state and USU, you can apply as a homeowner, or we are one of the few government agencies that do. And we received over 15,000 plants from them this year, which was phenomenal. And they are of such great quality, and pollinator species are so important to put an emphasis on, especially in our connected systems with the Great Salt Lake, Jordan River, and Utah Lake. And revegetation has been one of our biggest things we've done this year. We put over 25,000 plugs in Utah Lake, and this was either through a contractor or through volunteers. 10,000 of them were actually put in by volunteers. You can kind of see an example of that in our top picture, where we basically organize these quote planting parties, and we basically provide all the tools and the directions, and we really take it and be able to give them a good demo so that we can get high quality results. And it usually does work pretty well. We're working to revise this a little bit in the next coming year, but getting people involved and out on the lake is so important for what we're doing, because restoration can't happen if people don't care about it. And for Utah Lake, it seems like they just have this negative opinion of it if they've never been there. So once you get them out onto the ground, they go, oh my gosh, this is like amazing. This is the best thing ever. I love this lake. I should come here more often. And as soon as they get that firsthand experience, it really allows them to connect with this place that they live in. So these restoration events have really given us a chance to kind of breach the ecological and community side of our problems that we have. So in these events, we do so much education about what Utah Lake is about, what's improving, what still has yet to change, and it's giving us again a really good segue to be able to spread our mission and be able to do really great work on Utah Lake, both through our people who live around there, who live farther away, and also people who might have a negative perception of it. So here's a picture. This is at North Lake Park in the north side of Utah Lake, and I think we put over 7,000 plants in this area. Some of them are grown in already, and some of them are not. But this is kind of what a restoration site can look like. And again, you look at it and you go, that doesn't really look that crazy. But 5 years ago, this was completely covered in Phragmites, and we're really hoping that we'll be able to see some results for the next year and see how these develop, because these were all planted in the fall. So this next summer, we should really be able to see things come to fruition. And again, just as a overview that we've had, this is my slides from our symposium, so they're a little bit different than what I wanted to cover today. But again, just a reminder, we've had almost 80% reduction in Phragmites cover on Utah Lake. We spread over 70,000 pounds of seed. We've put in over 25,000 native plants, and we've had about 500, 450 volunteers involved just in this summer alone. So we're really excited to expand these numbers. For next year, our goal is to put about 40,000 plus plants in, 10,000 of them still by volunteer, 30,000 by contractor. And we just want to keep growing these numbers. And there are a lot of funding opportunities that have come up that we are excited to capitalize on to be able to make these efforts happen. So when it comes to moving forward, this is something that has been up in the air with a lot of the new changes in management, not only Utah Lake Authority, but there's a lot of new management plans coming out for Utah Lake and some studies. And we're really excited to be able to collaborate and make sure that all of these are in a cohesive moving forward action. We want to make sure that we can do what's best for Utah Lake, both ecologically, but also for our communities and recreation. And thankfully, this is just one of the spots that I get to focus on, is a lot of the revegetation plants. I have a little soft spot in my heart for plants. So being able to capitalize on all of these new opportunities to make change happen at Utah Lake is really exciting. So it's coming down the pipeline. We're receiving new funding from multiple sources for a multitude of reasons that we're really looking forward to being able to apply to revegetation efforts, restoration efforts on Utah Lake, and continue with conservation as well, because there are some biologically intact areas of Utah Lake that we're really looking to preserve and conserve instead of having to restore. And again, we always want to increase our education when it comes to Utah Lake about what's changing, what's gotten better, what still needs to be made better. And just being able to get people to have that firsthand experience with Utah Lake really makes a difference in what we do. And we want to get everybody involved. So this isn't, again, just people who live on the lake, but it's the people who work on the lake, people who are doing research on it, but may never actually come to it. We want students, we want kids, we want everybody who is under the sun of Utah County and onward to be able to get to Utah Lake. And again, Forestry Fire State Lands has been a great partner for this, and they have contributed over $300,000 per year that they're going to have for ongoing Phragmites treatment, which is really good, because we are, again, this is a consistent problem that isn't necessarily going to wane. We can't really hope for total eradication. So it's going to be a problem for a multitude of years. And so we're not really thinking that's ever going to go away for a long time, at least. And we're going to continue to apply for WRI funding. I'm just about to submit our funding for this year to continue our treatment and continue our revegetation. And then we received over $1.5 million for water quality and vegetation improvements that will be worked on in the next 2 years. And hopefully a lot of big changes are going to be coming out of that fund. So we're having a lot of good collaborators on these projects. That is something that I myself am very challenged by, but very looking forward to it. It's a lot to handle. Utah Lake is a very diverse place. So it comes with a lot of challenges, but it's something that's worth doing this all for. So again, I really appreciate being able to tell you guys about this and kind of what we are all about. So these pictures right here, these are some of the cool species that we have on Utah Lake. Right on the left is actually a Utes ladystress, which is an endangered rare plant. So we were able to find these on Utah Lake in some specific parcels that I cannot disclose. But it was so amazing to be able to see these really rare orchids growing in this area that historically they haven't been there in so long. And then we have like a Utah Lake paintbrush, and then we have skullcap, which are these are all just species that are people care about. They're colorful, they're bright. People tend to want to see those more because they're more charismatic. So, and again, they are, but they're also important biologically as well. This is Keith in a nice little area that this it's mainly consisted of Joe Pyeweed and Natal sunflower, and so this is one of the areas that like we are really looking to conserve and what we are hoping to recreate elsewhere. There's just such a high mix of plant diversity in this area that creates really nice habitat for waterfowl, for other wildlife species, and just creates a nice viewing experience. And the hydrology and water quality benefits that these kind of habitats offer is just tremendous in comparison to just a monocultured Phragmites stand. And again, this is another picture. This is in Powell Slough. This was also in Powell Slough, but this is also in Powell Slough. This is an example of what Utah Lake can look like. Way more mixed, more less homogeneous with Phragmites, and it can be really scenic. And these are the kind of places that we're trying to restore and make more accessible on Utah Lake, and just more abundant, because they really aren't. These are hidden gems now, and we think sadly don't have as many of them as we'd like with all the urban pressure that we do experience on Utah Lake and many of the water bodies in Utah. So those are just some pictures of what we are hoping to accomplish. But again, we're keeping our scope open so that we can still get achievable results. And with that, this is me, Sam, and Heather after a long day of hauling 15,000 plants out onto Utah Lake. And we were very dirty and sweaty and tired. And this was at like 9, or like maybe this was like 8 p.m. So shout out to the staff and everyone who helps with this to make it possible, because it is not always the easiest. So with that, I would love to take any questions that people might have about anything Utah Lake Authority, about restoration, whatever it may be. I'm happy to take any questions.
Great. Thank you, Addy. That was a great presentation. And I love that picture. You can see the sun is setting, it's getting low. So obviously it is late and you did some great work, and very rewarding it looks like too. So
yeah, it was quite a lot. So
yeah.
but it's very rewarding and fun, and but I'm happy to be coming into the winter season now.
Yeah, I bet. All right. Do we have any questions for Addy or Sam? Raise your hand either in Zoom, or you can even physically raise your hand if you prefer to. I have a couple questions, but I'll wait for others to chime in. Well, one of my questions is, you mentioned the $1.5 million in water quality funding. Is that WRI funding? I wasn't clear what the funding source is for that, and how long is that funding run for? Is that 1.5 per year, or is it like a 5-year program, or can you get more into that? And is that through like DWQ 319 because of the water quality? I know there's a TMDL. Is there a TMDL? I know it's impaired at least.
Yep, that's a great question. Yeah, I got that on Sam. Yeah, so Utah Lake does have a TMDL, and so at the time when we made this presentation, our funding work plan was a little bit up in the air, so we didn't want to specify anything super crazily. But the 1.5 million is actually allocated through Division of Water Quality's Utah Lake Preservation Fund. So that fund was created in 2022. I want to say we've had the fund since then, but we didn't have the right project, and now we're revamping it, and we didn't really know about it even till not very long ago. So that money is actually through federal funding. It's American Rescue Plan Act funding that was allocated to Utah Lakes Preservation Fund. So that was 30 million pot, and we received 1.5 million. So that has to be spent by the end of 2026. And right now we are the full scope of work that we're doing for that with all these objectives that have to do with vegetation and water quality improvements on Utah Lake. And we are working with really tightly with DWQ and a lot of the partners who are able to make this project happen through our vegetation working group that we've formed. And it's been really beneficial to be able to get a lot of guidance because it's not necessarily easy to do a huge project for 1.5 million by yourself.
Mhm.
So you have a great team for that. But our WRI funding, usually we receive about 200-ish thousand dollars a year, I want to say. And then we have a ton of match for that to make the project happen. And again, it varies year to year. And then we do other funding through DWQ, like our 319 funding, non-point source funding. And those are for other usually smaller projects. But
Okay.
preservation fund funding and WRI funding are probably our biggest and most reoccurring at the moment.
Okay. Fantastic. No, I was wondering about that. That is a good chunk of money though. You can make a pretty big impact with that, which is exciting. So, okay. Fantastic. Do we have other questions for our Utah Lake Authority team here? Exciting project. I'm just gonna say I'm so glad you're highlighting how amazing Utah Lake is and bringing people there and trying to tear down some of those perceptions around Utah Lake and making sure it's a destination place, which is great for our communities and everybody. Okay.
Yeah, of course. It's something that it's like we acknowledge that there's a lot of challenges with it and it's not the greatest place on earth, but we want to make it better and we want people to know it's better than they think at least.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll just say I'm really looking forward to working with you guys more. And Jens, I'm so happy you're hired now because I loved working with Ray and I'm excited to collaborate more and be able to kind of work with Jordan River Commission to make more happen on the Jordan River.
Fantastic. Looks like Soren has his hand up. Soren.
Yeah, sorry, my cell phone's signal. I'm mobile today, and it's been a little bit in and out. So sorry, I was like getting my hand raised. Addy, Sam, thank you so much for the presentation. Quick question for you. I don't know if you're far enough along, Addy, in the restoration work, but I'm curious to know, as you've been doing treatments for a few years to get the Phragmites under control, and now doing the seeding and planting to get the restoration work moving forward. How are you tackling Phragmites that may still pop up in the restoration? Because obviously you can't do the broadcast spraying and stuff like that because then you kill everything you've restored. I'm curious what your approach is. If you have a lot of work on the ground or, kind of the strategy for dealing with restoration areas where you see Phragmites maybe showing up again.
Yeah, that's a great question, Soren. And again, we are in the earlier stages of that, but I'll say kind of the approach that we take is just really strong site selectivity. So again, we've treated almost 9,000 acres in different phases. So some of these areas have been treated really heavily for quite a while. So they are really cleared of frag and they haven't shown any sign of re-veg in the last year or two. So those are sites that we are first focusing on just because we don't see there's a lot of regrowth. And if we see a lot of regrowth, we know it just needs more treatment and it's not quite ready for revegetation yet. And we do that usually if it's kind of the parameters we go with is if it's especially for an aerial sprayer, we say if it's all Phragmites, you can spray it. If it's 50% cattail, 50% Phragmites, you can spray it. But if it's more than 50% cattail Phragmites cover, then you won't, we'll save it for spot spraying. So usually for anything that's not necessarily in these large patches, we will do hand treating. And that's actually part of some of the money we're going to be using is to get better at having a better like strategic spot spraying plan in a way and make that more feasible because that is a challenge. So we have yet to kind of get into more of these areas that have more of a mix. We're really focusing on these areas that are Phragmites free essentially, and you can't always prevent it. There is a little bit of pop up, but another strategy we take is to really try to find resilient plants that are good competitors with Phragmites once they're established. So those are any things like we have like our bulrushes, our rushes, sedges. There's quite a few species that we have that are really resilient with that competition and they are able to form their own kind of small monocultures, but not in the same way that Phragmites does. They build more of a community and those help us be able to kind of combat that invasion a little bit, if that answers your question.
Great. Thank you. See, Soren's microphone was off. I know he's having some.
One other quick follow-up question. I know you've had great success with the WRI program. What recommendations? We've applied a few times and haven't been successful in landing anything yet. What recommendations do you have to kind of maximize getting some of those grant funds?
Yeah, that's also a great question. I was actually just working with Ren this morning on starting her application for it for the JRC. So we went over a lot. WR is an overwhelming program a little bit. If you haven't, once you're in, you're in. And it's hard, but breaking through the seal is probably the hardest part. I think some of the biggest roadblocks that people face is the people who are ranking these applications are come from a really diverse background. Like I'm part of the ranking committee this year. And I think there's like 30 rankers or something like that. And it's a huge mix of people with different experiences. And they have to strictly rank based on prompt. So some of these questions that they ask you, I would say click the little question mark that gives you the exact prompt. And I'm like, you should try to line that out and use those keywords as best you can, because if you're writing a novel and you don't mention any of those things, the ranker is just not really going to care very much and not want to really give it as much effort to read it if it's not clearly outlined. So I say for WRI, be clear, make sure you're following prompts really strongly, and look at other people's applications who have been successful and been funded. So in years previous, ours has been funded for I think 10 years, but like the applications have varied in quality for sure. But there's been a lot of other projects who aren't usually decades long. They're usually 1 or 2 years. And I think looking at those applications and seeing that they've been completed, what you can literally go and look at what their application was, and all the materials that they provided. So I would say highly recommend looking at other people's structures of how they apply, because usually all the projects are worth it. It's about how you're applying for them. So that's my biggest recommendation. And then take lots of pictures and supplement documents that can give more of a vision to what your project is. Because if people don't see it, they usually don't understand it. So I say that's another pretty big recommendation I'd give.
Can I add a little there, Addy, too?
Yeah, go ahead, Sam.
First off, Addy's being polite. It wasn't 10 years. We've actually been funded 15 years in a row. We're on our 16th application right now. I was on the ranking committee last season. I'm filling in for Eric until we'd gotten Addy caught up to speed on things. A couple other suggestions from being on the ranking committee. One is they take the time to read your application. So Addy's right about detail, but like one specific one I noticed that became a problem for applications was there is a question on there where it asks you what other plans that are out there is your project fulfilling, and they don't want a bullet point list of the titles of the plans. They want the plan and they want it referenced where in it it's filling and what objective or goal it is fulfilling by doing this project. And so the more you can tie to plans, but in a quality manner in your application, can definitely strengthen it. In the same way, having additional partners is really important, both in funding the project and doing it, but also in the land itself. So that's one strong suit the Utah Lake application always has, is because, we're talking about 400 adjacent lands that we're landowners, parcels that we're working with. And so we're working very collaboratively across those boundaries. And then the last thing, to what Addy said about photos and videos, they are really stressing that. They want to see befores and afters in applications and in reports, so that there is helpful content for the higher ups, because this is just our regions, right? There's a committee above that reviews and gives final approval at the state level, and that helps them really grasp it. And it helps them market the program, being able to show figures like dollar amounts, but also showing the before and afters and the work that's actually done. So there's a couple extra thoughts there for you.
Well, those are really helpful, and I hope anybody else that's listening in that may be considering a WRI grant, this is useful for you. I will just note, I've just joined at Eric Ellis's recommendation. It took me a couple of cycles, but I've just joined the ranking committee for this year's WRI
Hey,
application. So,
good for you,
Addy,
Soren.
I'll be with you in the room when we go through these and learning a lot. Appreciate any tips you could give me there. But we're also applying for a grant in partnership with Utah Lake Authority. They applied for a Great Salt Lake Watershed Enhancement Trust grant maybe 3 months ago, which was not awarded. But the idea is to do some work on Phragmites in this jurisdictional area between the lake and the Jordan River, where the inlet park is in Saratoga Springs. There's a lot of Phragmites there. So we're going to be focusing on that area. Ren, who's just joined our staff, is already starting to map out our grant application, and Addy, you've been super helpful with that. And so we'll keep you posted. If any of you are interested in WRI grants, I know we have partnered with a number of our commission partners to apply for these grants. We've come close. I think the last time we applied was maybe 3 cycles ago, and we were at the very top of the not funded list. So my hope is we can get across that threshold and find some additional funding to help with this work. But that's super helpful, and we really, really appreciate all the work you're doing because it benefits everything downstream in the watershed.
Great. Yeah. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time today. I know we're a little behind schedule, but any last questions then for Addy and Sam before we go to our next item?